Well, if I could sing, I would be singing happy birthday to the Let's Talk Thyroid podcast, because today the podcast turns 1, celebrating 12 whole months of putting information, education, hope, encouragement, stories out there to you to hopefully encourage you, inspire you, give you some practical tools so that you can feel better with your thyroid health. So that has been my goal. I'm so thrilled that, I've got listeners all around the world, people that have joined the Let's Talk Thyroid Facebook community. Really love the interaction that goes on there. And just knowing that there's some positive message and education that has been contributed by my guests, by the experts that I've interviewed, me just sharing my story and insights, I guess, as we've gone along. I just want to say massive thank you, because if you're listening to this, you are part of this Let's Talk Thyroid community. And so, so happy birthday to the podcast, and to all of you, I want to say thank you for being part of it. If you would actually like to contribute to the podcast, that would be very much appreciated. There are certain costs associated with producing a podcast. I do have a little contribute via PayPal button on the show notes on my website. Absolutely no necessity to do that. This is an entirely free service, I guess, I want to provide to the thyroid community at large. But if you've benefited and you think you would like to contribute, even if it's just $5, anything would be appreciated via that PayPal link. And the other thing, I guess, that I like to make sure that I offer is a thyroid strategy session. So if you are feeling a little bit overwhelmed, not too sure where to start, or not too sure what's next in your thyroid journey, then I would love to spend an hour with you and help you design a bit of a strategy, just a what's next, break it down into some easy doable steps, because that's sometimes what we just need, isn't it? To kind of cut through all the information and just come up with a bit of a plan. So always know that that is available. I am looking forward, on this episode being the 12-month episode, I really wanted to go back to basics. Now, if you've been following me on social media, which is annabelle.bateman.wellness on Instagram and Facebook. On Instagram during the month of May, I recorded 30 Instagram videos on 30 common thyroid symptoms, really as part of Thyroid Awareness Month. And I thought a really nice way of wrapping that up would be to cover the basics. It's always a good idea to go over the physics, the biology, what the thyroid does, how it works, what can go wrong with it, what goes wrong with it, all those, just the basics. And so I asked Tara Nelson, who is a thyroid naturopath in Western Australia. I've been following her for a while on social media. I love her experience. She's got 25 years of clinical naturopathic experience. She actually has Hashimoto. She has a daughter with Hashimoto's. She does a lot of both seeing clients, but also training practitioners as well on how to manage thyroid conditions. So I thought she would be the perfect person to go over the thyroid basics with us. And I thought that was a nice way of rounding out the Thyroid Awareness Month of May, resetting, I guess, with the podcast being 12 months old. We've covered lots of different topics, but just to come back to the basics. And you're going to love this episode. Tara is full of lots of really valuable information, explains things really clearly. And I don't know about you, maybe it's the brain fog thing, but I always find it helpful just to be reminded of the basics. It always helps me to dig a little bit deeper into understanding my own thyroid health and what's working and what's not working. And this was no different. I did learn a couple of interesting things actually in this podcast. So we're always learning. I'm always learning. I think I learn the most because I get to talk to all these wonderful people. So I really hope you enjoy this special 12-month happy birthday, first birthday podcast episode today. Hi, and welcome to the Let's Talk Thyroid podcast, where we discuss different aspects of living a healthy thyroid lifestyle, positively and practically, so that you can really thrive and not just survive. So join me, your host, Annabelle Bateman, and let's talk thyroid.
Hey.
Well, welcome, Tara, to the Let's Talk Thyroid podcast. It's I'm really looking forward to getting back to basics with you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, so like I said to you before, I have been stalking you on Facebook for a little while, quite a while, I think, actually. It's nice to have, it's just nice to see practitioners as, in the niche. I guess obviously I'm interested in thyroid, but it's nice and interested in natural health and that whole side of it, and nice to see Australians in that space. So, I have been watching and learning and being encouraged by, what you offer freely to all people. So we'll make sure we put the links to your social media in this as well.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you. That's awesome.
So we're going to have a chat about all the basics of thyroid health, because so I was just saying, it's the end of Thyroid Awareness Month of May. And I mean, this podcast's been going for now almost exactly 12 months. So I thought it was a really great opportunity to just revisit the basics, because the more we understand that, the more it'll help us to understand our own health and challenges and all of that. So
absolutely. And it's a big part of, I think, I'm really really sort of not strict, but I really like people when I'm either dealing with clients or my online programs, or even, doing my practitioner training in thyroid health, that, it's really important to understand, the functions, and go back to revisit that little bit of that anatomy and physiology and what it actually does and why it's so important, and, what happens when it's going into dysfunction and all those symptoms. So yeah, basics is great to cover, I think, anytime. I think we can all learn something new when we dive into a little bit of basics. Sure.
Yeah, I'm always learning all the time. I think that I've worked out the more I know, the less I know.
Yes, I know. That's exactly right. There's always more to learn. And there's always research. I do a lot of research. I'm a member of a lot of research associations that are constantly bombarding me with thyroid. I wish I had time. Reading research is a full-time job.
Yeah.
So I wish I had more time to read more relevant research. But yeah, we're always learning, and the space is always expanding, which is exciting as well.
Yeah, well, there's such a need for it. So that is exciting. And it's good to know that there's research coming through and practitioners.
There is, actually.
Yeah, it's good.
Yes.
So Tara, tell us a little bit about you and what got you into working in the thyroid health space. So give us a little, who are you? And tell us your story.
So my name is Tara Nelson. I've been a practitioner, naturopathic practitioner for 24, 25 years now. And round about sort of, probably, 18 to 20 years in, I've been seeing, face-to-face clients. I had a multi-modality clinic. Now I just work predominantly from home. I sold my practice when I was just about to have my first child, and I went on to have 2 more quite quickly. And round about probably about 5 or 7 years ago, I just started thinking, I was looking at where my business was going to turn to next. I had seen face-to-face clients for so long, and the space was definitely changing. And I think I'm a big believer in you ask and you'll be given subtle signs, or ask and you will receive. And I just started seeing a lot of thyroid clients, and it wasn't just actually a lot, it was like an explosion of thyroid clients in my clinic. And I guess I'd never seen too many before. Like it was, and I was seeing 15 in 1 week, or 7 in 1 day. I'm talking about an explosion, and I was getting very complex cases. So a young 29-year-old male walking in with a TSH of 209. I was seeing thyroid nodules. I was seeing thyroid cancer, and I just started seeing that this is a really complex little gland, and I was seeing clients that should be, with results where I would think that they could not even get up off the ground, and yet they had so much energy. And then I was seeing others that had every thyroid symptom, and yet their results looked fine to me. And so I thought, right, I'm going to something really spoke to me about that. And I really threw myself more, when I wasn't practicing, into research, and just really absorbing any information that I could take on about the thyroid gland. And then along the way, I discovered that, I was always encouraging, I wrote a practitioner training program, because I realized that practitioners in Australia, when I was looking at my naturopathic guidelines and principles and protocols, they just weren't working. It was very simplistic. It was like a one size fits all, very much like the medical system. And I didn't like that. There were these combination formulas, these synergistic thyroid formulas, but I thought, but it's not really treating the underlying causes. It hasn't got enough of what I really wanted to treat. And then I wrote a training program for practitioners, and I really encourage all my practitioners to get tested. And then I was having a very strange symptom for quite a while. And what it was almost like a reflux. I thought it was a reflux. I treated, before I niched into thyroid health, I treated a lot of gut, gastrointestinal, ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease and, gut infections. So I treated a lot of reflux with great success, but nothing that I was doing was shifting it. And I was just talking to my GP one day, and she said, look, let's do a full thyroid panel. Well, she didn't do the full thyroid panel. Actually, she just said, did my TFTs. And because I said, I want to endoscopy, I want to see what's going on. And we did that. That was all clear. She texted me a couple of days later and said, you have subclinical hypothyroidism. You have a TSH of 7 and very low hormones. And I nearly fell off the chair. Here I was, niching into thyroid health, preaching it, teaching it, and yet boom. Anyway, and then I tested my antibodies, and yes, I had Hashimoto's disease. So I got all my children tested. So I have Hashimoto's, and my 15-year-old daughter, I diagnosed with her with Hashimoto's.
Okay.
And it just made so much sense. And it really brought me to realize that there are so many people walking around with undiagnosed thyroid conditions, really just due to the inadequate testing, and practitioners just not knowing enough about what to look for in people. So that really spurred me on. It was almost like a blessing. I mean, at first I was shocked, of course, having an autoimmune disease, but I took it on as an absolute blessing that now I know how people feel. I know about that exhaustion, that brain fog, those symptoms, but also it is a beautiful, and I try and teach this to my patients as well, is that it's a gift, and it tells me now I'm in remission. My antibodies are, below the reference range, and all my parameters are in range, and I feel really good. But it's definitely a barometer that tells me when I'm working too hard, or I'm stressed, or I'm not sleeping, those symptoms will come back, because we're probably jumping the gun a bit. But, once you have an autoimmune condition, yes, we can get it into remission, but things will flare that up again. The immune system always remembers. But yeah, so it was, that's kind of how
that's really interesting.
I was already in the niche, but it was, yes.
Yeah, because normally it's the other way around, isn't it? It's the I've got it, I found it, I need it, so I think that's really really interesting.
And I think that's why I was so drawn to it. And the other thing I firmly believe, so I was diagnosed when my daughter was around my youngest, so I had 3 children in 4 years. I had quite a small frame. I ended up having 3 cesareans. So I was breastfeeding, 3 major operations, pregnancies. And I think probably around about 3 months postpartum with my 3rd child was when it actually happened, because my hair.
Right. When you look back, that's what you can work out.
Yeah. And I see that with women, postpartum as well. They didn't know they had a thyroid condition, but a lot of the time there is that underlying thyroid condition that's never developed. Then they go into pregnancy, and it's either triggered in pregnancy or it's possibly triggered postpartum. Yeah,
but we don't know, and I think that we'll come to all of the testing. We'll come to that. As you said, we're jumping the gun, but that's really helpful, and I think it's always good to know. What draws people in. Yes.
Personal and just desire, I think, to really bring awareness to practitioners, to patients, to the public, to even, my big aim is to really educate to get it out there to the medical system as well, and change how.
That is brilliant, because from a patient perspective, I talk to lots of people, and that's a common frustration. Very common frustration is
it's a common frustration for a naturopathic practitioner.
I'll bet.
Also for all practitioners, it's a massive frustration.
So I think we'll cheer you on gratefully. With a lot of gratitude.
I'm chipping away slowly.
Well, that's all we can do, isn't it? We chip away, we influence those that are in our world, and I guess that's what I believe our kind of life purpose is just to be you in your world, and that's what you're doing, and that's what I'm trying to do. I think that's what we all try to do. So we're going to go back to basics, and so let's go right back to the beginning. And what even is the thyroid?
Yeah, so it's a little gland that sits at the top of our neck, just below the Adam's apple. It's a little butterfly-shaped gland, and it's part of the endocrine system. So the endocrine system that includes the thyroid, the pancreas, the adrenals, the gonads, the pituitary, and even the gut. There's more research going into the whole endocrine system. And it's a very highly vascular gland. So there's lots of blood vessels around it. It gets inflamed very easily. It's affected by many different body symptoms. And it sits there at the top of I feel it's like in the midline of the body. And it makes hormones such as what we call T4 and T3, or thyroxine or triiodothyronine. And it releases hormones into the bloodstream when it's needed. And those hormones, those thyroid hormones, affect pretty much every single cell and tissue in the body. And what the thyroid does is it basically controls our temperature and our energy and our metabolism. And that it pretty much controls all those three things of every single cell. So every single cell has thyroid hormone receptors in it to help to metabolize and control the energy function of that cell. So it has a really important function in the whole body. When you think about things like the heart function, the digestive function, the kidney function, all those systems, the pancreas, the adrenals, all those systems require really healthy thyroid hormones to activate. So when the thyroid either slows down or it speeds up to its different conditions, it's going to affect every single cell and tissue. Well, not every it seems like people can have different low or high thyroid hormone receptors in different parts of the body. So it might not affect every single cell of that person. It's a very individualized thing, and we can look towards their symptoms to see what body system is being affected. But when it either slows down or speeds up, the symptoms are a lot because of those receptors on every cell.
Okay, so like receptors in one part of the body might be maybe less receptive than others. Absolutely. And that's why we might feel a symptom in so the gut or the brain.
When I'm seeing
that's interesting.
If I'm seeing someone with, say, hyperthyroidism and they have a lot of brain fog, then there might be sort of, the brain receptors are not being, and there's other things as well. So we can look towards stress there and hypothalamic and pituitary dysfunction affecting that. If the digestive system's really being affected, then we can look towards that those receptors in that area are not being activated enough.
Yeah.
Or in hyperthyroidism, Graves' disease, activated too much.
And is there a way to test that, or is that more like the symptomatic, like you sort of deduce that from symptoms? That's interesting.
Yeah, yes. No, I would say that generally we're looking at, when we're testing thyroid hormones, it's looking at, the level of thyroid hormone in the blood.
Not looking at the individual, cellular receptors.
No, yes. That's right, yeah.
Yeah, no, I hadn't heard that, but I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, that's sort of what the thyroid is and doesn't it? So produces these thyroid hormones. What are the common things that go wrong with the thyroid?
Yeah. So as I said before, it's such a very sensitive little gland. So it's very vascular. It sits just underneath the skin. There's a lot of lymph involvement, so it can become very inflamed. We often call it an environmental sensing gland. So it can actually slow down or speeds up in times of stress. Its whole metabolic function. I think when you think about in times of war and famine, it would, and not enough food coming in, it would actually slow down in those times to, it's like, well, there's no food coming in, there's not enough energy for the body. We're going to slow down that whole metabolism of the body so the demands for food and calories are less. So it's very receptive to what's going on, and I say it's very receptive upstream and downstream. So, it affects the brain functioning affects the thyroid, or when there's other problems in, say, with hormones, the gonads and the hormone reproductive organs aren't working well, or, the adrenals are under pressure, or the pancreas and blood sugar issues, even gallbladder, liver, the thyroid's going to respond to that. So it really sits at that top of the neck and is affected by things happening upstream and downstream, and will respond accordingly, slowing down, making more hormones. And if there's not enough, it's affected by, toxicity, can slow down when there's a lot of toxins around. And if there's not enough even nutrients, so, it's very, very nutrient dependent. It needs a lot of optimal nutrients, and when the thyroid does not have the right ingredients to make its hormones, it's not going to be able to do that either. There's a lot of different things. It can be, so I said, stress will affect its functioning, hormone imbalances, toxicity, even infections, whether it's a gut infection or a systemic infection such as sinusitis, viruses as well, can result in the gland either overproducing hormones or underproducing hormones. There's so many things that can affect it.
It's a little sensitive soul, isn't it?
It's very sensitive. I think this is why, there are so many thyroid conditions, and it's increasing because we live in a world with so much stress. I mean, look at the past 18 months. It's been, the whole world is under stress. And we've seen, there has been some research articles on COVID, not only COVID itself being a viral infection affecting Hashimoto's and the functioning of the gland, but also just the stress that COVID has created in really increasing thyroid conditions or flaring them up for sure.
Yep. Yeah. And it's just I guess it's responding to so many different things. There's so many different things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
So it's complex.
Like I said, I call it it's a nutrient expensive little gland. So it needs a lot of nutrients. We've got to have really good gut health also to absorb nutrients. So there's, things that can be affected there. And if you combine that with an autoimmune disease such as Hashimoto's or Graves' disease, that nutrient demand is even higher because the immune system is a very nutrient expensive system as well. So I did training with Auntie Ballantyne and Mickey Trescott on the AIP protocol that really looked at the immune system, not only from the diet. There's a lifestyle perspective with AIP that's just as important as the diet, which I think people miss. But the immune system is a really nutrient dependent gland, so requires a really nutrient dense diet and optimal nutrients to function well. So you've got the thyroid and you've got the immune system in total disarray. So that's what I really work with as a big step, is to get those nutrients into optimal levels, because it makes a big difference to people.
And is that, do you find that people need a lot of supplementation, or is it more through diet, or it's a combination when you're talking about getting those nutrients right?
Yeah, look, I wish we could get it through diet alone, but when you think about diet, our foods are very depleted in nutrients, unless people are eating a lot of organic foods, which I do highly encourage, organic meats and proteins. But initially, when I'm seeing on blood tests really either low iron or D or selenium or zinc or whatever, or iodine, we've got to go in with supplementation to get those to optimal levels, make sure the gut's working well, fix the stress, fix the infection. If there's an infection, the immune system is going to be working over time as well and burning a lot through those nutrients. So fixing those underlying causes and triggers, and also getting those nutrients up to optimal levels initially, just gets us up to a nice little baseline. And then once everything's sort of working well, we can drop back on the supplementation. But there's no getting out of taking supplements initially.
Yeah. I think most of us are.
I wish we could, but we can't. So it just makes sense. And we're giving really high doses sometimes too, because we're dealing with two very nutrient dense or nutrient expensive systems there.
Yeah. And so can you explain what's the difference between hypothyroid, hyper, and the connections then with Hashimoto's and Graves?
Yep. Yeah. So hypothyroidism is when the gland slows down. So it doesn't, whatever's happening in the body, it just can't produce enough hormones. And the biggest cause of that, and so what happens in hypothyroidism is the body slows down because it's not getting, so we think of metabolism, it requires a certain amount of T3 and T4 thyroid hormones for every cell to metabolize and the body to metabolize well. In hypothyroidism, when the thyroid gland can't produce enough of its thyroid hormones, all the body systems slow down. So we get a sluggish digestive system, we get a sluggish, tiredness and fatigue and brain fog, and hormones don't work well, and blood sugar levels can be affected. The biggest cause of hypothyroidism is Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So when the immune system, which is the autoimmune condition of hypothyroidism, is where, that's when the immune system develops antibodies and starts attacking the thyroid tissue. And during that attack, it destroys those follicular cells and those thyrocytes within the gland. So there's a reduced capacity to produce its hormones. And I do like when I first seeing thyroid clients, particularly if they have an autoimmune disease, when we discover that, either Hashimoto's or Graves', I do like to, or actually any thyroid client, I guess, is to get a thyroid ultrasound so I can look at the tissue through the ultrasound and see how much available tissue is there to actually produce its thyroid hormones. And then in so you've got hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's, and then on the other side of the coin, you've got hyperthyroidism and Graves' disease. And hyperthyroidism is when the gland overproduces its hormones. So if something has triggered it, could be a toxic nodule, it could be a virus combined with stress, leaky gut. That's when the body receives way too many thyroid hormones. So we think again, the metabolism, I call it, it's like the body is running a marathon while standing still. That's the effects, like when we run a marathon, our metabolism speeds up.
No, but
yeah, some are exhausted, but that's what's happening in hyper and Graves' disease is the excess thyroid hormones is stimulating every cell. So there's a big, massive rush of metabolism and the body speeds up. So we have loose stools, we have anxiety, we have insomnia, we can drop weight like kilos in a week. It's very, very aggressive on the body. Again, the biggest cause is autoimmunity as well. So Graves' disease, where the immune system is producing antibodies against the tissue.
Yeah. And I mean, it's my understanding they're the most common, Hashimoto's being the most, but autoimmune thyroid is the most common. Can you explain thyroid nodules and thyroid cancer too? Because I know sometimes they get a little, left out maybe.
Sure, yeah. And I'm seeing that more and more now that I've niched, and I think when I first started, I was seeing a lot of hypo-Hashis and I put all my effort into that. And I have Hashimoto's as well. And so I have that personal interest, but I'm seeing so much more hypothyroidism and Graves' disease. I think it is a lot more common than we think. It is really, and I want to bring awareness to that side of it as well, because I think in the medical profession, you have hypothyroidism and Graves' disease because it is so aggressive. They want to get rid of it fast. So they'll suppress it with antithyroid drugs. If that doesn't work, they'll offer radioactive iodine, which will kill off the tissue, or they'll suggest or thyroidectomy. So I think a lot of patients don't reach out because they're whipped away to the endocrinologist or the surgeon. You've got to get rid of that thyroid. And then they go into they've got to rely on thyroxine for the rest of their life. But I think because the more I'm in this niche, is I'm getting clients from all over the world, particularly with hypothyroidism and Graves' disease, wanting help, that they don't want to have that, and is there something else? So one of those biggest causes is thyroid nodules. Now, nodules are super common. So they are more common than we think, and that's another reason why I like to get a baseline of ultrasound to see what's happening. Usually nodules, they will create a bit of inflammation. There's different types of nodules we can have. There is like a growth of the tissue. We can have hot nodules, cold nodules, colloid nodules. There's lots of different types, but sometimes, and they can, if they're not too big, so some of them can overgrow. They can be in a cluster called multinodule goiter. That will cause some swelling in tissue. So when we see a goiter around the nodules, if that's obstructing any sort of swallowing or breathing, or, it's very uncomfortable, then they may be treated. If they're over a certain size, they might, or they look a bit suspicious on ultrasound, they might go in and do a fine needle aspiration, so an FNA or a biopsy. A lot of the time, I see clients that come back after that and it's inconclusive. Now, because, sometimes these nodules can become cancerous, it's quite rare, but it is possible. Again, the medical professional will say, well, let's just take out the thyroid. They might do a partial if they can just do one lobe where the nodule is, or nodules. They might remove that. And then that's the best case scenario if the person goes down that route, because then they still have the other lobe, which can function quite well. So I do have clients that have had a partial thyroidectomy. They still have enough available tissue to produce its own hormones. Or if there's not enough, they'll still have to rely on thyroxine. So nodules are common. Some of the most common reasons why people develop nodules are low iodine. So we always test for iodine. Iodine excess, again, can be a little bit of a cause of Graves' disease or hyperthyroidism. So iodine can be a little bit of an issue.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? It seems.
It's a tricky one, but
yeah.
but it's something that we all need in our body, and I always test and see what's going on there. Things like there's research around toxicity being driving nodule development. Also things like gut infections, blastocystis. There's a bit of research around gut infections. H. pylori is a very common trigger as well. So there's viral viruses as well, and autoimmunity, low vitamin D, selenium. There's some of the things why nodules can develop that I screen for a lot of my patients to find their underlying drivers. But nodules are very common. So usually we see, by the time someone's sort of 50 or 60, most people will have some sort of nodule development going on in their thyroid. It's very common.
Yeah. Okay.
And then again, if those cells change, there could be a bit, if it metastasizes or it goes carcinogenic, then it could be cancerous.
Okay. And then typically with thyroid cancer, they remove the thyroid. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, straight away. And that is why thyroid cancer is one of the most curable cancers in the world, because they just take it out straight away. It's a tricky one, because I've had a lot of clients that have had multinodule goiter or suspicious nodule that's got quite large. They've gone down the route of having total thyroidectomy, and then they found out, because it's very hard to determine what that nodule is going to do or what's happening at the time. I was actually just listening to something driving this morning about this, because I just listen to thyroid stuff all the time.
Yep, that's okay. Me too. Yep. Well, it's
boring, but yeah.
Well, it's not boring. Not when you're into it.
It's something else I can learn. But we're talking about nodules, and it's very hard to tell what's going on in that little nodule in the neck. So probably 85% of the time it'll be inconclusive, but they can't tell whether it's malignant or not. So usually actually I've read a bit of research the other day, and they're changing the medical sort of algorithm of how they treat nodules, which is actually really good. And they're leaving it for a little while. So they might leave it for 3 to 6 months and just wait and retest again.
Okay.
But I guess it's while that's happening, there's a lot of stress for that person that could potentially have thyroid cancer. So, I was treating a guy the other day. He had Hürthle cell neoplasm, and it was a fine needle aspiration, and it was not malignant. It was benign, but Hürthle cells can spread quite quickly, and he's decided to go and have that partial. But yeah, it's a tricky one, because he said, I just don't want to worry about it. And I said, well, as long as we can leave some tissue there for your thyroid to function normally, possibly on its own, then that's ideal. But the medical sort of recommendation is removal.
And I know with that, maybe because I know a bit more about the autoimmune stuff, because that's my story, there is so much diet and lifestyle, mindset, stress, detoxing, food, things that we can do to help manage that inflammatory load.
Yes.
But I hear a lot of people, and I've got a few, friends that have had thyroids removed, and they're like, well, that's not really, I don't have an autoimmune condition, so I'll just take my thyroxine. That's all I really need to do. I'm like, I don't know I'm not sure. But so what's your view on that? Like, if you've had your thyroid removed non-autoimmune, or maybe, then does that still matter?
Yeah, it does, because, I think just because you've had something removed doesn't mean that, that problem isn't going to shift to somewhere else in the body. So why did the reason, why did the hypothyroidism or the thyroidectomy is usually because of, a nodule or thyroid cancer, or hypothyroidism or Graves' disease.
Yeah.
You can have like a toxic nodule that's just overproducing thyroid hormones and not have Graves' disease with it. So yes, you can have that sort of instance. So I mainly see people that it's been through an autoimmune condition, I guess, combined with nodules or whatever.
Yep.
Or hypothyroidism Graves. But yeah, what happened? What happened in the body for that system to go awry? And just by removing the gland doesn't fix the reason why. So if definitely there was autoimmunity, that needs to be sorted out, because the autoimmunity may move to another part of the body. The immune system may just start to develop. So there's always underlying causes and triggers of why we develop conditions in the body. And if we don't, we just remove the organ and not treat that, underlying condition, it'll develop somewhere else in the body.
Okay.
So particularly post-thyroidectomy, I'm always working with clients so post-thyroidectomy, if they've had a total thyroidectomy, so remove the whole thyroid, they will have to rely on thyroxine for the rest of their life because they have no thyroid gland to produce T4. Yep. One of the most common things I see with my thyroidectomy clients is the inability to convert that T4 to T3. Mm-hmm. So I don't actually like, for various reasons, giving or when clients are put on T3, but post-thyroidectomy may be one of those times where it is needed.
Okay.
So, and when we're looking at why that person isn't converting their thyroxine that they're taking, their T4 they're taking, medication, to T3, now going back to basics again, T3 is, so the thyroid gland produces mostly T4, a little bit of T3, and then that goes out into the body. Oh, sorry, I've got these little bugs flying around.
That's okay.
The T4 that goes out to the body and it's converted in the peripheral tissues or the liver or the gut into T3, and T3 actually gets into the cell and gives us our metabolic effect. Okay, so we can take as much thyroxine as we like, but unless we're having that conversion, that can cause issues. So we need really good, inflammation, high estrogen, high cortisol, things like low selenium and zinc. Those sort of things can affect T4 being converted to T3.
Yeah. Okay.
So a common thing I work with thyroidectomy clients is making sure that conversion. So when I'm looking at blood tests, I want to make sure that T3 or T4, it's 3 times as higher than T3. So I'm looking at the T4, it might be say 15, then they should have a T3 around 5. So it's a 3-to-1 relationship, T4 to T3.
Okay.
And if the T3 is lower, then we're looking at, well, you're not converting it in your body. That's why you've got all these symptoms. It's a really common one. So when we look at those thyroid conditions like hypo, Hashimoto's, Graves', one of the conditions I see a lot in clinic is poor conversion of either their own thyroid hormone T4 to T3 or the thyroxine they're taking to T3.
Yeah. And so that's where some of that supplementation might be helpful, gut health, food, reducing inflammation.
Increasing inflammation, looking at their hormones, improving their stress response, because high cortisol, high estrogen will affect that conversion. Things like high cortisol. So when we have high cortisol from stress, ongoing chronic stress, or even high estrogen, which is super common in many women, it increases this compound called thyroid binding globulin, or TBG.
Okay.
And T4 actually circulates in the body. So when it's produced, it goes out into the serum, into the periphery, and it's bound to this TBG. And then it's released and cleaved into T3 and gets into the cell. When we have things like high estrogen and high cortisol, it raises the production of TBG, and that will bind more and more of our T4. And when it's bound to T4, it's inactive. That's another reason why people may not have. Yes, there's always underlying drivers that need to be sorted out.
Yeah, and so let's come to the testing. So assume for a minute that someone thinks that they've read up on different symptoms. They think they might have a problem with their thyroid. What should they do?
Okay. Well, ideally they'll go to their GP, and that, because we want to try and get it under Medicare, so it doesn't cost them anything. I work with some wonderful GPs that do all the testing, but I know how hard it's going to see clients online, and I see clients around the world. It's very hard to get the right testing, but we want to, go to their GP and say, I think, something's wrong with my thyroid. I want to get it tested, and we need to get the full thyroid panel. So initially, I want TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, which comes from the brain. It comes from the pituitary, and it tells the thyroid gland how much hormone to produce. So TSH will tell us a lot about, the brain function, how the pituitary and the hypothalamus and the thyroid are talking to each other. So TSH is great, but we also want, and that's the one that's commonly tested a lot, TSH.
Yeah, that's usually the first port of call, isn't it? That's what most GPs will
but
just
we want
do
it
that.
all. We want it all in one go so we can look at the thyroid puzzle and how it interacts all together. So TSH and the thyroid stimulating hormone. We also want the thyroid hormones that the thyroid gland actually produces, the T4 and the T3. And that'll tell us how much, it'll tell us if their medication is being absorbed. Number one, if they're taking thyroxine. But if they're not taking thyroxine, the T4 will tell us what the ability of the gland to produce its T4, its own thyroid hormones. And then the T3 will tell us how much active hormone is getting into each cell. T3 is one, like quite often we'll get TSH and T4 if we're lucky. They don't test T3, and it's getting harder and harder to test T3 these days. Particularly, I was talking to someone in Tasmania last week. They don't even test it anymore there. I'm not sure why, but
Wow.
T3 tells me
how do you know?
available hormone is able to get into your cell. That's giving you that
should be the more important reading, if anything, shouldn't it?
It's giving you energy. It's giving you, that's if you're feeling tired, fatigued, sluggish, your T3 is going to be low. And then reverse T3 I like to look at, because again, if T3 is low, what's happening to that T4? Is it all going off to something called reverse T3, which is the normal function of the thyroid? So if you're involved in a car accident or something like that, when they test your reverse T3, it'll be really high, because when you have an accident or something like that, or an injury, the whole body will slow down. So, we don't want to be metabolizing. We don't want to have lots of energy. We want all that inflammatory responses to happen and to start healing. So those metabolic functions that normally happen will slow down, and we'll see reverse T3 high, because reverse T3 is like a metabolic brake. It's like, put on the brakes. We don't need to be doing all this. There's another crisis over here. Right. But you can imagine, if for a lot of people with thyroid conditions, there's a lot of crises happening.
Yeah, I was going to say, then that makes sense. Yeah.
So all their good, healthy so their gland could be, really adept at making its thyroid hormone T4, but it's going all off to reverse T3, which is slowing everything down. So we like to see reverse T3, and then we want to check our thyroid is antibodies, so thyroid peroxidase or TPO, and thyroglobulin and TG. There's another one called TRAB, which I like to test. So if I'm thinking someone is displaying symptoms of hypothyroidism or Graves' disease, a TRAB or TRAB antibodies are produced in Graves' disease. So I like to test that as well if I'm thinking that that's going on. And a lot of people I see, have had Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism for many years, but when I go through their health history, their underlying initial condition was actually postpartum thyroiditis or Graves' disease or something like that. So and it's actually really helpful, because these people can flip back and forth between
I have heard of people doing that.
And there's we treat them in a different way than your stock standard hypo-Hashis, hypo-Graves. So it's more about modulating glandular and immune function rather than treating either way, because we can actually keep pushing them side to side. So TRAB antibodies are good to see if they're present as well.
Yeah. And they're often the ones that can be hard to get from your GP. Is that right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's tricky. Practitioners, we have access to things called Nutripath and other testing. We can get the full thyroid panel for you, but you just have to pay for it. So I do try and get them to go back to their GP. Most people will know. I mean, if I'm seeing clients in clinic, I'm very lucky to have doctors that I work with now. But if I'm seeing people online, I have a little tricks and tips that I can or I can write a referral letter for their doctors. A lot of practitioners will write referral letters for you and, say, this, I'm really thinking, can we get this, please? And often if a patient says to their doctor, I will pay for it, if you could just do what you can, let's think about, doctors that have run 5 days a week and have very busy clinics. They're under a lot of pressure from Medicare. So it's not actually all about that GP refusing. It's often they have to follow a protocol. It's a paradigm, a protocol that they have to follow. And unfortunately, the thyroid protocol is that we test in the medical profession, we test TSH first. If that's high or if it's low, we might wait 3 months and then we'll test it again. If it's still high or low, or it's got higher or low, we might then go and do T3 and T4. it's really a very slow process, and it's very frustrating. But if you go to your GP and say, look, what can you give me? I really want these tested. I think sometimes we have to be direct. And look, I want my antibodies tested and my reverse T3. You'll have to pay for the reverse T3 anyway. It's not covered under Medicare. But if you say, I just want to, get a baseline and I'll pay for it, generally they'll do it. Then it takes the pressure off them. Medicare gives our GPs a hard time if they're ordering things that it's not on the schedule. So they are under a lot of pressure. We have to give them that.
Yeah. And they're not, I mean, it's my understanding, I've looked into it, they're not that expensive. It's sort of around that $80-ish sort of mark.
Yes. And
so that's definitely worth knowing. That's worth
knowing.
Money well
to get
spent.
That baseline. Are we treating, hyperthyroidism? Are we treating an autoimmune disease? The treatment plan will be very different if someone has sort of, I can say straight hyperthyroidism, but, or if they've got Hashimoto's or Graves' disease, it'll definitely, I need that information. It's essential for me before I treat anyone.
Yeah. And so many people just don't know, like we often talk to people and they say, what do you do? Well, I'm, working in thyroid, and they're like, oh, I think I've got a thyroid problem. Oh, what have you got? I don't know. Oh, I've got the one that makes me fat. That's what I've been told. I've got the one that makes me fat. I'm like, okay. Do you know? Maybe Hashimoto's. That sort of rings a bell. I'm like, oh my God, it's important.
That's what I was seeing initially. Like now I just get, tons of thyroid patients see me. But initially when I was, talking to people in clinic and going through their health history, and so, I would start with what medication you're taking. Oh, I'm on thyroxine. Oh, you've got a thyroid condition. Yeah, I think it's hypo. I don't, and I say,
I was just told, take the pill. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it Hashimoto's? What's that? And I don't know how many times I heard that. Well, I don't know what that is. I said, well, have you ever had your antibodies tested? Oh, I have no idea. And these were patients or women that had been taking thyroxine for 20 years or so. Then we did a full thyroid panel, and there we go. There's antibodies in the thousands, and that's 20 years of
suffering,
autoimmune antibody attack, suffering, very debilitating symptoms, but also from that clinical point of view, there's not much bioavailable tissue left anymore to produce thyroid hormones or have that metabolic effect on the body. So it's really, it's depressing. I think it's really frustrating.
Yeah. So if you go through the testing and, well, you feel like you've asked, I mean, what happens if it comes back normal, but you still feel like it's not normal? I guess that's, what do you do then?
Yep. And I have a lot of clients like that too, that, say, I think I've got a thyroid condition. I've been to the doctor. I've got all the symptoms, every single symptom. I've got weight gain. I can't shift. I'm tired. I've got dry skin. My hair's falling out. I've got, my periods are irregular. I can't sleep. All the symptoms. I've got constipation. That's more hypo symptoms. But I've asked so many doctors. They all say my thyroid's fine. My thyroid's fine. And then I'll go, oh, yeah, you haven't had the right panel. Let's get the full thyroid panel done. And I'll put money on my, that they would have come back with either hypo or Hashimoto's or whatever. And they come back and I'm looking at their results and I go, well, you know what? It's picture perfect, naturally picture perfect thyroid results. So sometimes this can be something called what we call cellular hypothyroidism or cellular resistance. So there is a thyroid condition quite commonly where the gland is functioning as normal. So it's actually a good, healthy tissue. It's producing enough thyroid hormones. So we're seeing good levels of T3, T4. The TSH is in range because of those hormones are in range. Usually no antibodies here, but what's happening is that the thyroid hormones, that T3 cannot get into the cell. So it's called cellular resistance.
So that's coming back to that receptive stuff that we talked at the beginning.
Yes, yes, yeah. And it's the glands working perfectly well, but it's coming back to that cellular level. So we see this commonly in very inflammatory type or low mitochondrial state conditions. So if there's obesity or cardiovascular disease or, chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, there's some of the conditions where they're quite characteristic of something called low mitochondrial function. So every cell has that energy and that, should have a really healthy mitochondria. When we're seeing those conditions that have quite a high inflammatory load, it can affect that mitochondrial function, and it's almost like it just blocks the receptor, on a receptor level, the T3 getting into the cell. So again, we have to go in and fix up all those underlying conditions. A really big one there is chronic stress. So chronic ongoing stress and cortisol dysregulation, HPA dysfunction. That is a big one that can affect at the receptor level. So often I had a classic client who was a lawyer. She worked in Colombia, very stressful job for 5 years, just had very chronic stress, came over to Australia, actually saw me in clinic. And she was one of these patients that I really thought, oh, you've got every thyroid symptoms, but she was so inflamed. She had her cortisol was all over the place. And when we actually just went in and nurtured her stress and her cortisol and decreased her inflammation, and we didn't actually even treat her thyroid, we just and gave her the nutrients that she needed, all her symptoms went away. So it's cellular resistance, cellular hypothyroidism is another sort of condition that, is on my radar as well.
Yeah, that's good, because there do seem to be people like that, and then you get frustrated and, it's all in your head, and then you end up in this different kind of spiral. And so.
Well, I think too, number one is like, have you had the right tests, or are they just testing TSH? Because as we know too, people can have Hashimoto's and still have a very normal TSH. So a TSH of like 1 or 1.5 or 0.5, that's ideally where we like TSH to be, 0.5 up to about 1.5. Any lower, we sort of could be thinking hyper, any higher, hypo, but we can still have antibodies. And usually that's sort of either stage 1 of Hashimoto's, where the antibodies just hasn't affected glandular function yet, or that person could have done a lot of work and are actually just skating along quite nicely. Their antibodies aren't affecting, they're still there, but they're not affecting that glandular function. So number one is, have you had the right testing? We need to rule that out and make sure, because a lot of people have antibodies, they don't even know it because of that picture perfect TSH. Number 2 is, is it cellular hyperthyroidism? Is that what we're dealing with there? So it warrants, really good investigation.
Yeah, I think that seems to be often the thing, isn't it? You've just got to test. You can't just guess. You've got to test. Work with a practitioner that knows what they're doing.
That's right.
And don't give up.
There can be so many things. There's not, like we've talked about, there's not just your hyper, Hashim's grays. There's cellular hypothyroidism. There's poor, conversion from T4 to T3. You could have this high thyroid binding globulin, which we can test for that. That's binding all your T4 because of your high cortisol and your high estrogen. So if you've got hormonal condition, hormonal irregulation, PCOS, or endometriosis, or any of those sort of, hormonal imbalances, that can, raise your estrogen and increase this TBG, which binds all your T4, rendering it inactive. So there's a lot of different things that can be going on within anyone's thyroid presentation. It's just not as simple as take the thyroxine and see you later. Have your thyroid removed and then take your thyroxine and see you later.
It's just not simple at all. That's what I've I've learned, is that it's just not simple. And so, I think we could I'm mindful of the time, but we could talk, I could probably talk to you for a much longer, but can I ask you one more question? Is that okay if you've got time for one more question?
Yeah. No problem.
So how do you recommend people find a practitioner that knows what they're talking about, whether that's a doctor or naturopath or both, or and obviously people can connect with you, and we'll definitely share your contact details, but if people are looking for someone local, how do you suggest they find someone that can actually help them?
Well, I think these days, many practitioners will put on their bio or their about page that they, do have an interest in treating thyroid health, or that's their specialty or their niche. So, definitely really researching your practitioner. A lot of practitioners now offer discovery calls. So I offer like a 15-minute free discovery call. That's also for me to make sure that that's the right person that I want to work with, because I'm exclusively only seeing thyroid patients now. So it also helps me to see, if you're right for me, if I'm right for you, and actually maybe, I know another practitioner that would suit you much better. But asking the questions. Don't be afraid to ask. Look, I've got a thyroid condition. Is this something that you have experience with? You know, what do you do? What's your protocol? Working with GPs. Look, I think general practitioners are general practitioners. You know, that's not going to change anytime soon. But also there's groups, there's a lot of forums out there. Find a really good, thyroid forum, either it's on Facebook or Instagram.
Yeah.
I run a patient thyroid page, Tara Nelson Thyroid Health Naturally, where you can ask the questions, who's a good practitioner in my area? There's also, I know you've got a page, you can ask there. There's another group I know in Perth that's set up, I can't remember the name on Facebook, but they've got a really good database of GPs and endocrinologists in Perth and the surrounds that they would their patients highly recommend.
Yeah.
So I think we're very lucky to have the big wide world web, which is sometimes Google can be more
you've got to take the good with the bad, don't you?
Good with bad, but ask the questions. Don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah.
Make sure as I said, lots of practitioners offer discovery calls, and make sure you resonate. If you get a good feel with that person, and
because I mean, my view is that we've got to, as a patient, we should build a support team, around us. And obviously that can change over time, but we're in this for life. So I want to develop, as a patient, I want to develop a relationship with my support team, my doctor, my naturopath. Like I've got, you sort of end up with lots of different people. And so it's not just a one-off. It does matter. No. So I think you're right that there's got to be that connection. You've got to feel like you can trust them. That's right. And I guess as a practitioner, you want to feel like you're working with a client that wants help, that is going to work with you, and you get to know each other.
I'm glad you brought that up too, because being in my practice now for like 24, 25 years, I talk about this screening for patients. I want to make sure that person gets really good results, and part of that is them doing the work. I mean, I'm just the vessel for the information. It's really up to them what they take on and what they do, and the clients that do the work get great results. The ones that sort of come back, I didn't do that, and look, we're all human. We're all human. We all have life, things happen. I get that. I'm a mum of 3 kids, it happens, but it's being passionate and really wanting to make the changes, and you can feel so much better when you bring that in. So it's a team, like you said, it's a team, and it's a contract. It's like, well, I'm giving you the information. Let's work and see what happens and get those really good results.
Because we can feel better, and I can say that.
Absolutely.
You can say that from personal and clinical experience.
Absolutely.
And so so much of what I want to do in this podcast is not just this conversation, but all of the conversations, is to offer hope.
Fantastic.
There's so much, it's complex, it's lifelong, but there's so much we can do. There's so much positive in it. So
And it is a gift, like looking at your thyroid, that, I also look at, the metaphysical causes and, what the thyroid gland represents, metaphysically, but also, seeing it as a gift, and instead of like seeing it as a life sentence and as something that's going to ruin your life. And, there's so much that we can do to feel better. And it tells me, it's my barometer. When I've been doing too much, it'll just tell me, slow down. And embrace that, beautiful thyroid lifestyle that is, once you do embrace that lifestyle, it's actually really freeing. And it's, there's so many lessons in there for us all.
Thank you. I think that's a really beautiful way to wrap it up. But tell us, how can people get in touch with you, Tara, if they're wanting to connect or follow you or have a consultation with you? How do they connect with you?
Sure. So my website is, taranelson.com.au. You can find me there. I have a Instagram page, which is Tara Nelson Thyroid Health Naturally. That's my Facebook page as well. So Facebook and Instagram. I have a thyroid group, Tara Nelson Thyroid Health Naturally. That's my patient group that you can go on for lots of support, ask questions. There's lots of, great people in there. I think that's about it.
Well, that's a lot. And I'll make sure I put all those links, in the show notes too, so people can easily click. But Yeah, that's really helpful. So thank you so much, Tara. I know you're a wealth of knowledge, and I also want to say to those that are listening that you're doing a lot of training of practitioners and, in that space. And I just want to, as a patient, say thank you to you for doing that, and for people listening to know that you are doing that, because that is so important. Like, we get frustrated that practitioners don't seem to understand, but to know that there are people like you, doing your bit to contribute in that way, I think is really, really fabulous. So thank you. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Let's Talk Thyroid. I would love it if you enjoyed it, if you would hit subscribe and the bell. That would be really helpful. Even more helpful, actually, would be to share it with someone else who you know has thyroid issues or you think would benefit from listening. That really is part of my mission, I suppose, is to spread the message of positive and practical approach to managing your thyroid health, so that people really kind of have more energy to get on with living their life and not just kind of trudging through each day. So spreading that word really genuinely helps other people feel better, live better, be better. The best way that you can connect with me is through my website, which is annabellebateman.com. From there, really, you'll be able to connect in all the other ways. I would love it if you would join my Facebook community group. There's lots of great support there. It's all free. That's just being with like-minded people. But from the website, you can also book a strategy session with me. So if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, not too sure where to start, then book a strategy session. There's also freebies to download and links to look at my online courses or purchase some essential oils or my cookbook. So that's really the hub, would be annabellebateman.com. But look forward to connecting with you and just being in this thyroid health journey together. Have a great day. Bye.
The information presented and discussed in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease and should not be used as a substitute for proper advice from a qualified professional.